who worked with the Democrats in the Senate to come up with a jobs bill, only to have their leadership put the kibosh on it. We are for creating long-term economic growth. You do that by incentivizing entrepreneurialism, risk-taking, and investment. You do that through creating certainty in the markets, through certain tax incentives, and that's where we'll be on a jobs bill.
So it sounds like you like what the Democrats are doing here.
Well, I don't like all the pork that was in the bill. The $787 billion stimulus bill, the largest spending bill in history. One of the reasons why it didn't create long-term growth is it didn't have stimulative tax cuts in it, but rather a lot of pork and spending.
Which are the least stimulative things in the stimulus. I mean, when you assess what creates jobs in the stimulus plan, it's the tax cuts that were put in order to try to win Republican votes that didn't come anyway, that are the least effective thing in the stimulus bill. So the theory doesn't match the practice here. But you, I mean, you in your district,
I
just this week you were at a community college touting a $350,000 green technology education program, talking about how great that was going to be for your district. You voted against the bill that created that grant. And so that's happening a lot, with Republicans sort of taking credit for things that Democratic bills do, and then Republicans simultaneously touting their votes against them and trashing them. That's, I think, a problem that needs to be resolved within your caucus, because, I mean, you seem like a very nice person, but that's a very hypocritical stance to take.
He scared employers, so jobs were scarce. His nearly $1 trillion stimulus created not one net new job in the private sector.
Governor Schwarzenegger, that is where the Republicans are. The stimulus was a failure, and it did not create one net new job in the private sector. True?
Well, you know, to me, I find it interesting that you have a lot of the Republicans running around and pushing back on the stimulus money and saying this doesn't create any new jobs, and then they go out and they do the photo ops and they're posing with the big check and they say, isn't this great? Look what the kind of money I provide here for the state, and this is great money to create jobs, and this has created 10,000 new jobs, and this has created 20,000 new jobs, and all of those kind of things. It doesn't match up. So exactly. So I mean, I think
hypocrisy at the highest level.
I think, you know, I don't want to beat up of my Republican colleagues, but I think that it's kind of politics rather than thinking about only one thing, and this is, how do we support the president? How do we support him and do everything that we can in order to go and stimulate the economy, get the economy back, and think about the people rather than politics? I have been the first governor of the Republican governors to come out and to support the stimulus money, because I said to myself, this is terrific, and anyone that says that it hasn't created a job, they should talk to the 150,000 people that have been getting jobs in California.
Private sector?
Yeah, from the private sector and also from the public sector. I mean, if it is teachers, if it is university professors, if it is people that are building infrastructure and stuff like that. I mean, there's in every category, there's jobs that have been created in California. 150,000. These are 150,000 people that are going home today with a check, that are providing for the family, that can buy the textbook for their kids, that are feeling wanted and needed and feeling productive. I mean, about a job, it's not just a job, it's all of those kind of other things. So I'm happy that we got this money. I'm happy that we have put 150,000 people to work, and there will be more people that we will put to work.
You know what they're saying, ma'am, that, you know, you railed against stimulus spending and dough, and you wanted a chunk of it at the time. What do you say?
Well, first off, I think they're being a little hypocritical, because I'm going to continue to rail against the ridiculous spending in Washington. And what was before me was a request by a group from my district, and I do represent the 2nd Congressional District of Ohio, asking me to write a letter asking the Department of Labor to give them fair consideration on a project that they wanted in the stimulus, a job training program project in the stimulus.
And this is what you had requested, the roughly $4 million for, and out of stimulus. Ultimately, that was rejected. But you still had sought.
Yes, it was rejected. And you know, Neil, let me add that when they made that request, I informed them that as a large critic of the stimulus, that my letter might do them more harm than good because I'm going to continue to stand up for America and say no to this ridiculous spending. But they still asked me to write the letter so that they could get fair consideration from the department. And I hope that they did get fair consideration and it wasn't my letter that caused them to have a rejection.
Nevertheless, can you understand, Congresswoman, how this raises some hackles because you had railed against this sort of thing? You know, yesterday on this very show, Republican Congressman Jason Chaffetz was taking on his own party. Remember this?
I took out a 12-year incumbent Republican because of this very issue. I was adamant in saying, look, we have got to be good stewards of the American people's money, and those that refuse to do that are going to suffer the consequences.
All right, was my next guest listening is a fellow Republican Congressman, Aaron Chuck. He joins us right now. Congressman, what do you make of that? A colleague of yours who says no pork, ever, ever, ever.
Well, I agree with his statement that if we're not good stewards of the taxpayer money, we're going to face consequences and likely be unelected, as was a Republican majority that I think lost its way with spending. And clearly, the Democrats are doubling down here and spending more than ever has been spent in our country's history. And the issue of pork, or community projects or earmarks or whatever you want to make them out to be, the reality is it's none of those projects that really affect the deficit as much as it is just overall discretionary spending here in our country. We just passed an omnibus bill this week that increases spending 12.5%. At a time when every state, every local government is cutting back, we're adding spending increases here on the average. Well, so are you, though,
Congressman. You know, no offense, sir, but you're no shrinking violet on this pork train. I mean, you've committed $3 million to relocate a base entrance to Lincoln Capitol Airport. I don't know what that involves. Maybe it's perfectly justified. You spent another $800,000 on something called Illinois Height Modernization for the Illinois State Geographical Survey, and another $250 grand for the Oak Ridge Cemetery improvements. I certainly hope some very important people are buried there. My point is that this is vital. All right, this is vital to you, right? But someone else might call it pork.
Well, first of all, the person buried at Oak Ridge Cemetery is a man named Abraham Lincoln, who you may be familiar with, and because of that, it gets a huge amount of traffic, and which is what I would argue is a reason the federal government has something to do
but with that cemetery. But you've allocated $250,000. $250,000. What about this $3 million? What about this $3 million for the airport? What are you doing there?
Let me give you a fact to consider. Okay, if earmarks are the problem, then what would you say about the $787 billion stimulus bill, the largest spending bill in our country's history, which the president rightfully so says there were no earmarks? How about giving all of the federal money to unelected bureaucrats who never have to justify where the money goes, who never have to face an electorate or an election to be reelected?
Well, Congressman, I don't know which guy you are. Are you the guy criticizing that spending, or are you the guy doing the actual spending? I went to your website. I see, and quite to your credit, you say, I cannot support vast increases in spending on current programs that are pork-laden and have nothing to do with stimulating the economy, and instead simply stimulates government. Yet you appear, maybe for completely justifiable reasons, sir, to be doing the same exact thing.